World of Warfare presents Operation Torch. In June of 1940, Adolf Hitler basked in his own glory after his Wehrmacht forces swept across the Low Countries of the Netherlands and Belgium before storming into France for the capture of Paris, effectively confirming Germany's Blitzkrieg possession of continental Western Europe. Yet Hitler's Reich chose not to occupy the entirety of France, leaving the south to be led by the aging Philippe Petain of the officially independent Vichy France. Not wishing to upset its puppet master Germany, Petain sent more than 100,000 Vichy troops to defend her territories in North Africa, including Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia, against possible incursions from British-held Egypt and Italian-held Libya, the latter under the control of Fascist Italian dictator Benito Mussolini. With France on her knees, Mussolini decided to bring his nation into its first action of the Second World War. To take advantage of France's weakened condition, Il Duce declared war on France and Britain on June 10, 1940, and in an all-out push to seek glory of his own, Mussolini invaded France in the Battle of the Alps, only to suffer a humiliating defeat by a French force of inferior numbers. Undeterred in his ambitions for conquest, 3 months later, Il Duce launched an attack on Egypt by his powerful 300,000-man Libyan army against the British Western Desert Force of Major General Richard O'Connor's contingent of 36,000 men, with plans to connect Mussolini's dominant Libyan territory with his possession of Abyssinia to the south. With British forces outnumbered 10-1, the Italian 10th Army began its invasion of Egypt on September 9th, pushing 65 miles along the Egyptian coast before setting up a defensive position on September 16th at the coastal port city of Sidi Barrani. On December 8th, before the Italian 10th Army was ready to resume its advance on Mersa Matruh, General Sir Archibald Wavell's Western Desert Force, soon to be renamed the 8th Army, began Operation Compass, which was a 5-day raid against fortified 10th Army encampments around Sidi Barrani. Britain's raid against poorly trained and under-equipped Italian soldiers proved to be an overwhelming success, and those few units of the 10th that were not destroyed outright were forced into a hurried retreat to Saloum, before crossing back into Libya, to Bardia, Tobruk, and other smaller Libyan cities. In early 1941, O'Connor's mobile armored force outflanked the Italians at Bet Afam, pushing them back 500 miles to their defeat at El Agale on February 7th, ending in the destruction of 9 Italian divisions and the capture of 133,298 Italian and Libyan soldiers. Britain's easy victory in North Africa ended when Hitler sent Erwin Rommel's newly minted Africa Corps into Tripoli on February 11th, beginning a punishing 27-month period of back-and-forth advances, victories, and fallbacks for both sides of the conflict. Rommel's siege of Tobruk in March of 1941 was followed by an Allied victory that pushed the Desert Fox back to El Agale by December. Rommel again advanced beyond Benghazi in January of 1942 until Britain's heavily defended line at Gazala and Tobruk stalled Rommel's advance until May, when he finally broke the Allied line in a move that forced the British back into Egypt. After a series of Allied leadership changes and repeated supply line failures on both sides, Lieutenant General Bernard Montgomery took over control of the 8th Army, which led to the Allies' victory at the First Battle of El Alamein in July of 1942, a leadership injection that rapidly restored Britain's badly flagging morale. After America's entry into World War II on December 8th of 1941, just 1 day after Japan's unprovoked attack on American personnel and naval assets at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, the question of how to deploy American resources fell under a period of intense debate between British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, American President Franklin D. Roosevelt, and key military leaders from both Allied nations. At the time of America's entry, the Germans had engaged Operation Barbarossa, which saw some 3.8 million Axis forces invade the Western Soviet Union along an 1,800-mile front that now had the Germans fully engaged in what would prove to be the largest and deadliest land war in world military history. In an attempt by the British and the Americans to draw Hitler's attention away from Russia, thereby relieving extraordinary pressure on Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, Western leaders knew that they wanted to open another front, although the question of where became a contentious sticking point. U.S. Army Chief of Staff General George C. Marshall envisioned a direct assault on Western Europe with the goal of aiming directly for the German heartland, while in stark contrast, his British counterpart, Field Marshal Alan Brooke, Chief of the Imperial General Staff, believed that while American troops were numerous and eager for a fight, they were also inexperienced and relatively disorganized at such an early moment in their participation in the Second World War. In Brooks's way of thinking, the idea of a massive amphibious landing in France was a mistake so dreadful that Britain would pay a devastating price, all at a time when Great Britain was a mere shell of her former self due to the Nazis' blitz on the United Kingdom. Years later, Brooke would write, "I found Marshall's rigid form of strategy very difficult to cope with. He never fully appreciated what operations in France would mean, the different standard of training of German divisions compared to the raw American divisions and most of our new divisions. He could not grasp that the Germans could reinforce the point of attack 3 to 4 times faster than we could. Nor would he understand that until the Mediterranean was open again, we should always suffer from a crippling shortage of sea transport." The Allies' deadlocked impasse became so severe that Marshall briefly considered shifting the U.S. Army's focus entirely to the Pacific, potentially abandoning Britain to fend for herself on the Western Front, until FDR steadfastly intervened in an almost unheard-of overrule of his military high command. Deeply aware of Britain's immense lone man struggles since the war's onset, Roosevelt refused to give the Germans any opportunity to sense disunity and conflict among the Western allies. And while the American public pressed the president to challenge the Nazis head-on, Britain's recent defeat at Tobruk added additional weight to Roosevelt's ultimate decision. Coincidentally, Churchill was visiting the White House during FDR's decision window, who appeared visibly devastated by his country's defeat at Tobruk, an event which galvanized FDR's support of sending American troops into North Africa, which would further allow the American industrial machine to hit high gear in terms of war production and personnel before attempting any invasion of Western Europe. In hindsight, Roosevelt's decision made for a critical turning point in the war. Codenamed Operation Torch, on July 26 of 1942, FDR appointed Lieutenant General Dwight D. Eisenhower to spearhead an invasion force of 107,000 men working with his British counterparts to settle on timetables, troop dispositions, and landing sites along the North African territories of Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. To add to the complexities of the budding operation, all 3 territories were under the control of Vichy France, which still harbored anti-British sentiments after Britain sank her North African naval fleet at Oran in 1940. As a result, Allied war leaders decided that Operation Torch should appear to be as American as possible. As Hitler pushed ever closer toward the successful seizure of Soviet oil fields, which were vital to Germany's expanding war footprint, Hitler's overconfidence led to a critical error when in November of 1942, German and Italian intelligence officers reported a significant buildup of Allied ships near Gibraltar. The Italians, sensing an even deeper threat, implored the German High Command to take the reports seriously, yet Hitler ignored Mussolini's pleas due to his eroded confidence in the Italians' ability to fight. Hitler's dismissal of solid intelligence reports, brushing it off as nothing more than a supply convoy bound for Malta, would prove to be Germany's most haunting misstep of the war, a cogent oversight that would ultimately lead to their defeat. Given the top-secret nature of Operation Torch, few Americans took notice of the massive buildup of warships, troops, and other weapons of war amassing on the east coast of the United States throughout the bulk of 1942. Rails and highways bristled with eastbound processions of military might, a massive parade of equipment, supplies, and personnel. Across the pond, British tanks, guns, and troops clogged rail lines in a similar fashion as the two Allied nations prepared for the invasion of French North Africa. In one of the most audacious gambits of the war, the Allies would transport 107,000 soldiers from seaports in the U.S. and Great Britain to strike the North African possessions in Casablanca, Oran, and Algiers against not only German opposition, but potential opposition from Vichy France. To further tilt the odds in favor of the Allies, the Third Reich, ever suspicious of the Vichy France regime, starved French Africa of resources, leaving its defenders ill-equipped and undertrained. Germany's haunting began in earnest on the morning of November 8, 1942, when at 5:30 in the morning, a harried and anxious Ulrich Joachim von Ribbentrop, the German foreign minister, reached out to his Italian counterpart, Galeazzo Ciano, conveying the unthinkable that American troops had landed on Algerian and Moroccan shores. For Axis commanders, the reality was undeniable, for in their unifocus on the Eastern Front, they had been blindsided by an audacious American strike in North Africa during a critical period that Churchill would later dub the Hinge of Fate, for in tandem with the Allies' invasion of North Africa, the German advance on Stalingrad had reached a standstill, while Rommel faced his first stinging defeat in Egypt. In less than 6 months, the war's momentum had shifted dramatically away from Germany, when Americans' superior tactics and equipment came up against depleted French Vichy forces, leaving the Americans to face their biggest challenge, which proved to be the wild Atlantic Ocean. The American transport Leonard Wood lost 21 landing craft to ferocious waves, resulting in egregious casualties, while the Thomas Jefferson lost 16 of her 31 landing crafts during their initial landing attempt. Even worse, a transport ship named Carroll lost 18 of her 25 landing craft, while most of her surviving landing craft were severely damaged, leaving just 2 boats to ferry troops and supplies ashore. Many brave American men, eager for combat, met their end in the unforgiving seas off the coast of North Africa. To further the hurt, the Algerian beachheads also saw Allied landings hampered by a relentless and pounding surf. However, the U.S. troops that managed to reach the shore were able to secure their objectives, largely due to the exceptional leadership of Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr., the eldest son of Teddy and Edith Roosevelt. Despite the heavy losses inflicted by both the sea and pockets of fierce French resistance, Allied forces captured their targets before pushing further inland. Fortune again favored the Allies when Vichy French Admiral François Darlan, second in command of Vichy French forces, happened to be in North Africa tending to his sick son. After witnessing the Allied invasion, Darlan saw the futility of resistance, arranging a meeting with U.S. commanders to reach a ceasefire agreement with the Allies, which saw them turning away from their German overlords to join the fight beside the Allies. When news of Darlan's actions reached Hitler, his fury was boundless, for not only had the Americans invaded North Africa, seizing most ports, airfields, and fuel depots in Morocco and Algeria, but they also convinced the spineless French to capitulate to the Allied cause. In response, the German High Command succumbed to Hitler's rage, and despite being overcommitted on the Eastern Front as they prepared for their counteroffensive at Stalingrad, They rolled over when Hitler ordered the seizure of Tunisia, diverting crucial troops from Stalingrad to Tunisia, thereby further stretching his overreach of manpower and war machines. At first, the German invasion of Tunisia appeared triumphant, as the Nazis secured the territory and stalled the Allies' advance, leading to the brutal defeat of U.S. troops at Kasserine Pass by Rommel's Afrika Korps in February of 1943, exposing the fragility of the Americans' foothold in North Africa. Yet thanks to the U.S. military's quick adaptation to the harsh realities of desert combat, Rommel and other German commanders soon realized the inevitability that North Africa could not be held indefinitely against overstretched and dwindling supply lines. By spring, the Allies had severed Axis maritime communications in the Mediterranean, forcing German ground units in North Africa to rely solely on air resupply, which proved patently insufficient. For their part, as April 1943 approached, the Allies at last achieved air superiority over the Mediterranean, decimating the Luftwaffe's Ju-52 transport fleet, which left German troops in North Africa now desperately undersupplied. Combined with a lack of reinforcements caused by the Battle of Stalingrad, the remaining German and Italian forces in North Africa capitulated in May, leaving Italy poorly defended as the Allies set their sights on the invasion of Sicily, followed by the invasion of mainland Italy. More importantly, once inexperienced U.S. troops had learned to combat the Wehrmacht, placing the Mediterranean Sea and its vital shipping routes firmly in control of the Allied cause, ensuring the supply lines necessary for a future invasion of France, making Operation Torch a turning point event in the Second World War.